Greetings and good tidings, you good people. Welcome to Stone by Stone, an Edgewater Castle podcast, where we peel back the layers of the beautiful game like the 32-paneled onion that it is. Join me, Andrew Swanson, your host, as we engage in some insightful conversations with some very remarkable individuals. These brave souls will share their unique perspectives on the world and its game, their personal narratives, and how football has woven itself into the fabric of their lives like the thread in a highly personalized quilt. A heartfelt thank you to our production sponsors, Tightrope Recording, for their masterful sound engineering, and to our dedicated listeners. Your continued support means the absolute world to us, so thank you for it. Now, hear ye, hear ye. Gather round the hearth. Pour something literally or figuratively warm into your cups, and welcome to Stone by Stone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I am your host, Andrew Swanson, and I am here with Ryan Helgeson of McEntee Law Group. Ryan, thank you so much for being here today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. So just so people have some context, this is probably a very random way to start talking to a lawyer of any kind in our podcast, which focuses primarily on American soccer. But to give our listeners and viewers a little context, we've worked with McEntee Law Group for a number of years on a bunch of different things. We obviously work in the world of soccer, in which there are people from all over the world participating and who want to participate and are a part of our club. So we've been very grateful to work with McEntee over the years as partners, as customers, as sponsees. So yeah, thank you for all the hard work you do at McEntee, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been our pleasure to be part of what you do.
Awesome.
It's very important to us, and we're glad you're part of the community.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So listeners, today we are going to be focusing very much on immigration, and that is primarily your line of work, right? What's your exact role with McEntee?
I'm a senior attorney. We are a boutique immigration law firm, so I handle mostly employment and sports-based cases, but we also do family law as well.
Awesome. Cool. So immigration is obviously a very hot-button topic these days.
Indeed.
Here in the United States and abroad. So, you know, one thing that I always like to do before we kind of dive into the meat and potatoes of immigration, its history in Chicago, where we are today, is just to learn a little bit more about our guests, to figure out sort of what led you here into this, right?
Of course.
Great. So let's start at the beginning. Where'd you grow up? What was your childhood like? How was your experience as little Ryan way back when?
So I grew up in Janesville, Wisconsin, which is a small town, just barely into Wisconsin, just above the Illinois border. Mm-hmm. It's a very medium-sized town. It was known for a GM plant, so that was very a working-class town. My dad owned a bar right by the GM plant, so
nice.
Hung out, kind of grew up there, serving beers at 3 years old for a penny tip.
Yep.
Yeah, it was a very blue-collar kind of childhood.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How is that? That plant is no longer there?
It is not. It closed. It partially closed when I was in high school and then fully closed probably about 25 years ago. Yeah,
okay.
So it was a big change for the town, definitely.
Yeah, I can imagine. What kind of effect did that have on the town? I mean, I'm assuming it just meant a lot less people with jobs in town. Is that the case?
Yeah. It's the entire economy of the town kind of had to shift from that, basically being a union town to, finding other kinds of work. So a lot of other companies came in. And we're still the largest town in the county, so a lot of the government stuff is there, and hospitals and things like that. So yeah, a lot of the workforce left, but a lot of new people came in to fill different kinds of jobs.
That's great. So overall, it's sort of on the up and up from the closure of the plant.
Yeah, it was certainly dark times around then.
Yeah.
But the town has rebounded very well, and it's been impressive.
Amazing. Were there any influences or experiences that sort of sparked your interest in law as a younger person prior to college or getting more literally interested?
Yeah, it was my brother, one of my older brothers, was very interested in student government, and he was always studying presidents and kind of had that nerd energy about government.
Oh, I'm familiar.
Yeah.
Not about government necessarily. Lord of the Rings, things like that for me. But
Right. Yeah.
I digress.
Yeah. So he was, and he was, my older brother. So I looked up to him and kind of, just followed him around as he learned about that kind of stuff. And the law and how it was created was just kind of always there for me as a very small child. So
awesome. How many siblings do you have?
I'm the youngest of 4.
Okay. I'm the youngest of 3 myself, so I can relate to, I'm sure, some of that. Was did he end up pursuing that as his career?
He was student class president for a couple of years. Unfortunately, he died very young.
I'm very sorry to hear that.
Yeah, but that was also one of the major impacts on my childhood and where I am today. Was
absolutely
kind of picking up from that.
And I'm sure the influence of him and his interests then probably guided a lot of where you've ended up today. I would imagine.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry to hear it.
Of course.
Were there any specific values or lessons your family instilled in you that you still carry with you today?
Absolutely. Like I said, my brother died young. He died from cancer, and it was kind of a long illness for him. Mm-hmm. And, that put us economically in some tough situations. So we depended upon the generosity of others. Eventually we kind of, got out of that and became, a middle-class family where, but then seeing how my parents and the rest of my family gave back, were just instantly generous to others, really influenced me. How they, no questions asked. If you needed help, they provided it. And that's been a big influence on how I try to live my life. And that's kind of, one of the reasons I love law and immigration law in particular is it is giving back on an individual level. And it's very important to me.
Absolutely. Did you have any childhood ambitions or dreams that you could sort of connect to the work you do now? You sort of spoke to it a little bit in the values thing, but yeah, is there any sort of like did you have something you wanted to be as a kid?
Well, honestly, I wanted to be an astronaut.
Yeah.
That was number one. But that wasn't going to happen. It really was beyond a specific, career ambition. It really was just those values that my family instilled in me. They were always like, doesn't matter what you do, just try to be better every day. Yeah. And that's really what I wanted to be, was better every day, and kind of be a kind person. That was my career goal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So rather than any specific occupation, I just whatever it was, it was do it the right way.
Be a decent person.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's about as good as you can ask for coming out of a household.
Yep.
So let's talk about your education a little bit. You grew up in Wisconsin, just over the border. Mm-hmm. Where'd you go to college?
So my freshman year, I went to St. Mary's College in Minnesota. Okay. Went there for just 1 year, mostly to play sports. Okay. After that, I transferred to University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, which is right in the middle of the state. Graduated from there with a bachelor's degree in forestry.
Okay.
Oddly enough.
Nice. Good fodder for a tangent there. Where did that come from? I mean, I can see where the values fit in, but explain that process.
So we grew up a little rural, so I was always outside. We were surrounded by woods, so I was just spent all my time there. So kind of the appeal of making a career of walking around the woods and doing things was appealing.
Yes.
So tried to make a career of that. Unfortunately, there weren't many full-time jobs in that field. When I worked for the Forest Service for a couple years, did some private companies for a little bit, but then ended up, kind of having to switch gears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. I've grew up spending a lot of time in the woods and in the outdoors and stuff, and there is definitely a part of me that wishes I could incorporate that somehow more into my life here in Chicago. Bit of a challenge.
It is.
The forest preserves, they all end at some point,
Indeed they do.
It's hard to take a hours-long walk through the woods when it only takes you about 30 minutes to get through the whole thing.
Yeah.
But, cool. So you ended up with with a degree from UW-Stevens Point, and then what was your next step after the forestry tangent?
So I came back to Wisconsin. I'd lived in Oregon and Connecticut, and then came back to Wisconsin.
So those were the forestry locations?
Yep, those were the forestry locations.
So both coasts.
Yep.
Wow.
Got around.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Came back to Wisconsin. Did a lot of science-based work. Was kind of working for pharmaceutical companies and R&D kind of stuff because I had that background. But everywhere I went, there were lawyers, and I was like, there's a career.
Yeah.
That's something, and it matches up with, kind of the long-term plan of helping others, where, more than what I was doing at that time. Law school became a really appealing option and went that direction.
Where'd you end up for law school?
I went to DePaul Law School here in Chicago.
Got it.
That's when I moved to Chicago in 2007.
Awesome.
It was a school that kind of had those values that I share, and had a good reputation. Offered me some scholarship money, which was always
gotta love that. Absolutely.
And it was just the right distance from home. And it's a town I'm familiar with and have always loved. So.
Of course. And we mentioned this before you started recording, but despite having a Wisconsin driver's license, you're a fan of Chicago sports teams.
Yes.
You're a Bears and Cubs fan.
Yeah, I grew up Bears and Cubs fans, much to the chagrin of the rest of my family.
I'm sure, but that's a huge win for Chicagoans. Yeah. We love to hear that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Great. So you're at law school at DePaul, 2007. I also moved here in 2007. And I don't know if you remember this, but I think one of those first years, there was like a wild snowstorm in like the winter of maybe 2008 or 2009.
Yes.
It was one of the ones where like all the cabs were stopped on Lake Shore and everyone had to walk home from the lake.
Indeed there was.
Yeah. That we don't get too many of those anymore, I've noticed.
That's fine.
It's okay. You're okay with it?
But I know why.
Yeah, of course. It's a plus minus situation. But yeah, I look back on that period of time, like just on the cusp of the Obama era in Chicago. Was a really beautiful time.
It was.
So, those of us who were here look back on it quite fondly these days.
It was electric.
What a different world. Did you have any particular professors or courses at DePaul Law School that really influenced your thinking about where you wanted to take your career in law?
One of the professors I worked with, he taught torts, which really doesn't have anything to do with what I work with.
What does that mean? Because to me and my wife, that means a tortellini dish.
Exactly.
Like.
Yeah, those are like personal injury lawsuits.
Got it.
That's the quintessential tort.
Okay, and is that like layman terms like ambulance chaser?
It could be, yes.
Okay,
yes.
I know that's probably a rude thing to hear as a lawyer, so I don't want to offend anyone.
There are some of those.
Okay, fair enough.
But he also was a rather prolific author, and he wrote a lot about injustices in law. Talked about the trials after World War II at the Human Rights Court, and talked about the Central Park Five and those type of cases. And he wrote books on them, and he just was really focused on how the law can be better. And how it can, how it can go wrong, and also how it can go right. And that was a big influence on me. I worked for him for a couple summers, and helped him on some of the books and stuff like that.
That's awesome.
So it was definitely formational in how I thought about law.
What are the names of those books? Do you remember?
Oh my goodness. I've been put on the spot.
Give me the author. Give me the name of the author again.
Stephen Landsman.
Stephen Landsman.
Yep.
Okay, great. So if any of our listeners are curious to be influenced, as Ryan was, go find Stephen Landsman's books on law and its, pluses and minuses.
Exactly.
Thorns and roses of law. That's probably not what it's called. Don't look that up.
No, that's not the title.
Okay. How did your law school experience prepare you for the realities of practicing immigration law?
The best thing law school does is prepare you how to think like a lawyer.
Okay.
It teaches you how to analyze any topic from multiple angles and work with the facts that are in front of you. You know, a lot of people use it to, twist kind of and use it poorly, but you can also use it to emphasize the right things and to plan for what the other side is going to be thinking.
Sure.
So you can really have that ability to analyze a scenario and prepare a case that really suits what you're trying to go for. And
right.
That's what law school helps you do, and helps you do clearly and concisely.
Got it. Great. So were there any specific experiences, and you mentioned this a bit with the books and helping out with that specific professor, were there any specific experiences that led you specifically towards immigration law outside of the sort of justice in law? I mean, I know that's a bit of a oxymoron maybe, but
an inception.
Yes, an inception of ideas. But yeah, was there any experiences you had outside of working on the book and the influence of that teacher that really gave you a specific desire to move into that main area?
Yeah. Outside of the classwork, I also worked for the DePaul Family Law Clinic.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with domestic violence cases. They had a domestic violence clinic there, and I also worked for the Illinois Guardianship and Advocacy Commission, which represents individuals who are mostly adults who are going to be, who other family members or whatever are trying to get guardianship over them, mm-hmm. or work with them in that way. And a lot of the people I came in contact with through there, my clients were immigrants, mm-hmm. and working with them on cases that weren't necessarily related to their immigration status. You could see how you kind of heard their stories and how it was kind of a struggle from the beginning, just for them to get into the country and to do anything, and then to end up in a legal system at all was just, a tough experience and a confusing experience for them. Yeah. So yeah, that really kind of pushed me into that, there's something here that needs to be fixed, and, there's a population here that really needs, as many people as it can working for it.
Yeah.
So that kind of definitely pushed me in that direction.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And, obviously, Chicago is an incredibly global city. There are people, I always say this about Edgewater, which is where I live and where the club is based. But there's 70-something languages spoken in that ward alone, right? Mm-hmm. And then, that is a mind-boggling number of languages to be spoken in a square mile.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I find most beautiful about Chicago is that you can just sort of run into someone from anywhere in the world, and mm-hmm. you can literally hear any one of those 70 languages just walking down Broadway,
Yep.
But I think there's something really fascinating about the idea of thinking of these experiences as stories, right? That people are in certain situations that when you encounter them, you don't really know what their life has been like, how hard it has been to even get to this point that is also very challenging, right? In the circumstances you're talking about. And I think, the way people think of, immigrants or people from refugee situations or people who have arrived for whatever reason, is so polarized, and there's so much of it that feels very, good or bad to me because I am an undeniably sort of biased person there. But, the thing about law is it's supposed to be very clear cut, and it's supposed to not really allow for bias, right?
Correct.
So that's something I find very fascinating in this moment, and that, we live in a city full of people from all over the world, and sort of the desire to celebrate that. We want to feel as though that is the only way things should be and can be. But obviously, given the times we're in right now in the U.S., it's a scary time for that community in a big way.
It certainly is.
So yeah, we're going to get deeper into that part of the conversation, mm-hmm. Closer to the end. But I'm curious to know. We've got a break coming up here in just a second, but I'm curious to know. Do you know a lot about sort of like the history of immigration in Chicago or the U.S. or sort of that part of the storyline of sort of long term?
Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with the immigration history of Chicago, as
Cool.
kind of part of the research I did for one of those books kind of involved some of that. So I do have a bit of knowledge about that. By no means an expert, but I can talk to it.
Certainly closer to an expert than I am on the diagram. So I'm curious, what sort of, if you can, like paint us a picture of sort of like the history of Chicago immigration in a way. Obviously, the first immigrants to Chicago were the non-native peoples of this land. So let's start there. Who were they?
It was, I will say, the immigration history of Chicago has been continuous.
Yes.
It's forever changing, forever developing, forever growing. The first major influx after kind of settlement was probably after industrialization. When 1850s, when Chicago really started to boom. A lot of European ancestry individuals came here. Irish were a big part of that. That's still a big part of Chicago. Anybody who's ever been here on St. Patrick's Day will attest.
Yep.
So that was kind of the first big movement. Once you get into the 20th century, I think one of the things that's often overlooked as part of an impact on the culture of Chicago is the Great Migration of Black Americans from the South.
Yep.
From 1915 to 1970. Chicago really put itself forward as a destination for that population and became one. And I think that influx has really benefited the city by bringing a lot of cultures here and kind of serving as a base for a lot of that. It's always been a destination for immigration from Mexico and Central America. And then more recently, we've kind of shifted into seeing more immigrants from the Middle East and North Africa. So there's been definite trends, but it's always been a continuous stream of immigrants from all around the world. There's a lot of neighborhoods here that are very have a particular culture.
Ukrainian village.
Yes.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, Greek town.
Yep. Yeah. And so there is a lot of that, and it's one of the great parts of the city is that there is all of that diversity. And it's always growing.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. I mean, like one of the things that I think is such a great indicator of that is like, and this is a little bit, cliche to say, but the food scene is so good in Chicago.
Oh man.
And the fact that it has basically every cultural touch point contributing to that, like that isn't an accident, Yeah. It's helpful that we have like Ethiopian restaurants and Vietnamese restaurants and literally every kind of restaurant. Culture matters, and it's helpful to have many of them contributing to the pot, as it were.
Indeed.
So we're going to get into a little more after the break, but would you say that the situation that sort of we seem to be facing as a country for the next 4 years right now, would you say that it is as scary as it appears to be? Or would you say that there are things that those of you working in this world have are sort of working on that make you feel like it's a little less scary than a person with no knowledge like myself might assume it is?
I think it has the potential to be as scary as a lot of people think it is. But I think it's going to take work by not just immigration attorneys, but by everybody to make sure it's not as bad as we worry it could be. It'll be a group effort to keep the rule of law and keep justice for humans at the forefront.
Okay, great. Well, on that note, folks, we're going to come back after a quick break and figure out how we will all do that and contribute and help. Ryan, this has been super fun. Thank you so much. Folks, we'll be back just after a moment. Talk soon. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stone by Stone. I'm your host, Andrew Swanson, joined here by Ryan Helgeson. Thank you so much for being here, Ryan. We got very, very close to getting into the meat and potatoes of the conversation just before the break there. But for those who have been listening, strap in, folks. We're gonna get down to the facts here. So, Ryan, looking ahead to the next 4 years, what are some of the most pressing immigration policy issues facing the United States?
Everything.
Great.
Next question.
Okay.
The biggest challenge right now is to shift the rhetoric from this dehumanizing alienization of humans from other countries. The fact that that's come to dominate the press and the whole the topic of the discussion of immigration in the U.S. I think that's the first place to start. Obviously, there's lots of policies and rule changes that are impacting the day-to-day lives of individuals, but I think if we can focus on and change that rhetoric and remember that there are humans on the other end of this conversation that are just trying to live their lives, that's a start. But I think that's the biggest challenge, is that the dominant idea out there right now is this us versus them, and that we're being invaded. Yeah.
Okay, great. How do you see the current political climate impacting immigrant communities and the practice of immigration law specifically?
Well, right now there's a lot of fear. I mean, people are justifiably afraid. The threats that are out there, from the top levels of government on down are legitimate, and they're trying to carry them out. So it's a lot of addressing people's concerns and helping them be prepared for what may happen and what's planned to happen. It's really personal at this point. It always has been, working with people on an individual level, but now it's, people worried about, am I going to get separated from my family, tomorrow? Is my kid going to get picked up from school by ICE? It's a scary time, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. And in Chicago, obviously, we've always been very proud of being a global city, and we've always sort of flaunted that to the rest of the country. And it seems that we have a bit of a target on our back as a result of that. Do you, being a immigration lawyer in Chicago, do you feel any of that sort of specific intent, Sauron's eye, floating toward Chicago specifically?
Yeah, certainly it's there. I mean, there's the presence, there's the attempts to, enter schools, there's, the threats. We're being sued by the government for, being a sanctuary city, which we proudly are. I think the law is on our side on that. I think we'll win. I think there's nothing wrong with the sanctuary city policies from a legal or ethical standpoint. But yeah, there is that target that is on Chicago that has a lot of people here worried. But I think Chicago's history and its people will stand by what they always have and kind of shine forth and be the best version of themselves at this time. I think the threat is there, and I think it's kind of galvanizing the toughness against it. I think it's the opposition is real.
Yeah, city of big shoulders. So what advice would you give right now to immigrant families who are sort of navigating the complexities of this situation that perhaps that aren't your clients right now,
Right.
People, just sort of general advice you can give?
Yeah, I think reaching out to an attorney, if you can, if that makes sense for you, is a good idea to explore if maybe you've got options that can help your situation and help your family. Otherwise, it's taking advantage of community resources. There's a lot of organizations out there, whether it's your church or your local community center, they've all been preparing for this since the election. So there's a lot of, ability to know your rights, what to do when, if ICE, you come in contact with ICE, don't say anything.
Yeah.
It's the number one thing. You don't have to talk to them. You don't have to present any documents. You can just turn around and walk away. That's well within your rights. But knowing your rights and having a plan, having an individual out there, a family who's got access to the documents you need, who is an emergency contact for anyone in your family, who has that phone number memorized, have a plan just in case the worst happens.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest misconceptions about immigration policy that you would like to clear up for any of our listeners that you've noticed specifically in recent months?
I think one thing that's been overlooked, not just in recent months, but for, I think, many years, is that, a lot of what's happened in immigration, for the past several decades, has been, in particular in the last 2 presidential terms, has been coming from the president. The president has limited authority to do things through executive order.
He's going to hate to hear that.
Yeah. Sorry, Donald. But it is limited, and there's only so much they can do. And we're in this situation where, the back and forth between administrations and ideologies is leading to these huge shifts in what people can do and how government agencies are acting. And that's all due to congressional inaction. If Congress stepped up and made immigration law that made sense for everybody, we wouldn't be in this situation. And I think that has been lost in a lot of this. There's a lot of good things that the Biden administration did through its, adjustment of policies, but those can all easily be undone by this current administration because they're just presidential actions, and this new president can do them differently.
Right.
So I think that is one of the things that has really been lost in the conversation.
Yeah, is the fact that the system we have to manage this in any way has sort of been inefficiently utilized.
Yeah.
And would you say even that, by playing into that game, Biden and the Democrats sort of allowed, maybe not allowed, but sort of presented an opportunity for it to just continue back and forth and have things stripped again?
Yeah. I think they knew that was, a real possibility, that's what they were doing was temporary. The congressional inaction, the immigration system has never been great. It started way back when on racist ideas of excluding Chinese and has always been built on those exclusionary principles. So the system is broken, is at least 30 years out of date since the last time it was, amended in any way. And the inability to make real reform to the law itself has opened the door for this kind of, the Donald Trumps and the Stephen Millers of the world to exploit it in all of the worst ways they can.
Yeah. God, he's just the worst. Here's my bias again. I just don't like that guy. How do you see technology playing a role in the future of immigration policy and legal practice?
There were advancements under the Biden administration of the use of technology to kind of make it easier for individuals. There was a CBP-1 program for people kind of coming in across the southern border where they could, kind of schedule an interview and let the government know they're coming and, kind of take care of that. That went away on day one. They shut that program down with no one.
Funny?
Yeah.
It's so funny that one of the problems is that they just won't do it the right way. And yet the right way is less and less accessible to anyone.
Exactly. There are ways to use technology to make it better. I think, from the practice side of it, from, the work I do, technologies of utmost importance of, keeping track of everything at the least. And the use of artificial intelligence is growing. It can do a little bit now to help, some of the simple processes, but we're not being replaced yet.
Yeah.
You still need the lawyer to read it over and make sure it makes sense.
Yeah, a little empathy doesn't hurt every once in a while
exactly.
too.
Yeah, put some human into it. Is definitely a good way to go. Technology has its place and can be used to make things simpler and streamline processes. Backlogs in immigration courts and in all applications are extreme and excessive. The use of technology can help alleviate that, and I think slowly the government is moving that way to help processing times. But the gutting of the federal workforce is going to slow that down. So there was hope for it, and there will be again. But I think it's got potential.
Okay. What are some of the biggest challenges to currently providing adequate legal representation to the immigrant population in Chicago, and how can these challenges be addressed in the next 4 years, I guess?
The biggest challenge right now is misinformation. There's a lot out there about what's available, what benefits people can go for. People are afraid to seek anything to make any sort of acknowledgement that they are here without authorization, or have a family member that is, or even if they are here with authorization, they're still afraid. So that's one of the biggest challenges right now, is to make sure people know what's real and what's not. Contacting attorneys, contacting your community centers that are involved with this, nonprofit organizations that can provide you legitimate information is kind of the way to go forward and combat that. There's, misinformation is prevalent and pervasive, and combating that with education and critical thinking is what we have to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Can be a tall order in this day and age, the old critical thinking.
Indeed.
Absolutely. And do you know, can you maybe, we'll share this when the pod comes out, obviously, and links and stuff, but any specific organizations that you know of that people can sort of look to other than McEntee Law Group for this kind of help? Yeah,
I would say Chicago Volunteer Legal Services, CVLS, is great. There's also the National Immigrant Justice Center, NIJC. They're based in Chicago as well. They're fantastic. They have all the resources in all of the languages you could think of to help you, both to give you an analysis of your case or just give you answer a few simple questions. They're a great resource.
Awesome, great. We're a soccer podcast. Right, we haven't done a lot of soccer talking this episode, but one thing that I find very, very fascinating in my own dark humor kind of way is that we've got a World Cup coming to the United States.
Indeed.
Next year, and I can't help but see some irony on the horizon here, in that our immigration policies are fraught at the moment and definitely sort of a scary category of our society right now, but we're also hosting the entire world for a very, very large publicly televised event in not too long. What do you think about that? What's your sort of thoughts on the fact that this is happening? We obviously don't have any games being hosted in Chicago.
No.
But given the folks at the top of the chain right now, and welcoming the world in as the rest of this is going on, what's your sort of thoughts on that?
I agree that it is extraordinarily ironic that it's occurring at this time. I think the opportunity to be on the world stage will be too enticing for Trump to pass up. And I think he'll definitely want to use that as a platform, and he will. He'll show up at games and do his thing. But I think the fact that it is such a huge world stage, and it's been in the works for long enough, that I think it's going to be pulled off.
Yeah.
I think there's gonna have to be a lot of preparation, both from a security standpoint and from an individual standpoint on what's a public space, and can I talk to me while I'm there. I think there's going to be a lot of that needs to be discussed from the immigration side.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's going to be a great event. I really do think it's going to bring the world to the United States. Hopefully that makes an impression on everybody.
Yep.
And shows that these kind of competitions show a commonality amongst people in the world, and that it really is brings people together on opposite sides of a contest, but still joins them together through sport. And that's one of the beautiful things about sports, is that that really does that.
Yep.
You can be anywhere and see someone in a jersey, and instantly you've got a connection with them.
Yep, absolutely. It's fortunate to be in Chicago, knowing that the most popular jersey in the world for a long time was just like Michael Jordan's jersey. It was all over the globe, so you could go basically anywhere and probably see one and be like, I'm from Chicago. They'd be like, oh wow, that's great. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I find the irony very palpable with the World Cup coming, and specifically in this context. But yeah, I do very much believe that despite the sort of challenges and ideology that exist here, and the irony therein, it is an opportunity for people that love being American, but also love all the different things that makes America and all the different places they come from. The World Cup is really the best possible way to celebrate that, is that the world has always come to the United States to become a part of it, and that it is a part of it and will always be. So yeah, I think it has the opportunity to be a very beautiful thing, despite those who will be preening on top of its stages, I'm sure.
Indeed.
So for our final question today, what message of hope or encouragement would you like to share with Chicago's immigrant communities, or immigrant communities across the country, in the face of these ongoing uncertainties facing the country right now?
I think the most important thing for immigrants and their families to remember is that there are tens of thousands of attorneys on your side and millions of individuals on your side that believe in you and that are fighting for you and that want to keep Chicago and the United States a welcoming place. I think there's a groundswell of support that has always been there and is now coming to the forefront, and that will continue to be there. As an immigration attorney, I will fight for the rule of law to be applied equally to you, that you get your rights, you have due process, and that's not going to stop. I think there is real hope in humanity, despite the current circumstances. There is reason to be hopeful. This too shall pass.
I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you so much. And I lied. I have one more question.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So my final question is this: for those of us who, in many ways, feel very privileged to not be under the spotlight of this fear right now so much, what can we do to be more supportive of these communities without drawing attention or being too invasive or anything? I'm curious to know, you mentioned something earlier about how we all have to kind of chip in and work together to prove that we can actually have the welcoming city and world we want to have. What can sort of normal folks like me do to help?
It's staying abreast of what's going on immigration wise. I know it's tough to watch the news sometimes. We all have to take breaks from it, but staying alert for bills that are coming forward and contacting your congressman or representative to voice your opinion. That's what they're there for, is to listen to you. So that's something everyone can do. supporting food pantries and shelters. A lot of people come here as immigrants with nothing. So they need those social resources. So continue to do charitable efforts, and then just being an ally. Being kind, speak your opinion. Change the rhetoric by continuing to remind people that there's humans, and there are kind people out there, and just be one of them, and that will help. Mm-hmm. That will help.
That'll help. Every little bit helps, folks. Get out there and be nice. Ryan, thank you so much for coming in today. This has really been a wildly educational and bizarrely hopeful end to the conversation. I'm very, very happy.
I'm glad.
Don't need therapy this week. This has been fantastic. I'm just kidding. I do. But yeah, Ryan, thank you so much for being here. If anybody listening to this would like to get in touch with McEntee Law Group or Ryan, how do they reach out to the office?
We're all over social media at McEntee Law Group. Any platform you can think of. McEnteeLaw.com is where you can find us. We're everywhere you want to look for us.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for being here, Ryan. And ladies and gentlemen, have a great rest of your evening. Keep your hope alive, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much. Ahoy there! Thank you for listening to Stone by Stone, an Edgewater Castle podcast. Be sure to listen to our next episode, or better yet, subscribe to our channels on YouTube, where you can find video versions of our episodes, Spotify, Apple Music, or anywhere else you get your podcast fix. We'll have a lot of exciting new content coming up throughout the year, and we want you to stay along for the ride. In fact, you should probably just follow us on all social media platforms also. Just to be safe. And with that, I leave you be. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for supporting the club, listening to the podcast, and as per usual, go Rooks.